now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shireen. Thank you to the AMI. Thank you to all of you who joined us this evening in Watan and this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. I would like to thank also Salil Shetty, who's one of the great reformers of our sector. Our sector is not very large, but it is passionate, it is effective, and what he has done at the global level in his time at ActionAid, the UN, especially at Amnesty, where I was witness to his work over 4 years, is quite remarkable. I think that this country needs to recognize the quality of this man. Shireen said that Hindutva is the biggest enemy, and I would agree with that statement. I would ask us and myself what it is that it means. I think that one of the issues that we face as Desis is that we do not know what the ideology ruling India today wants, because it doesn't expressly say what it is that it intends to do. Does it intend to change the constitution? Does it intend to do to create some sort of a Hindu Rashtra? If so, what does it mean? And I've been thinking of this for some time, and I'll just put my thoughts out as they come to me. The first is that for decades, the primary object of the BJP or the Janasangh, as it was known in the time before 1980, was the marginalization of Muslims. The specific phrase used in 1965 by Deen Dayal Upadhyay was that we should politically defeat the Muslims. So that was the aim that the RSS came into politics with. It is safe to conclude, I would say, that this has been achieved today in India. That of our states, we don't have a single Muslim chief minister. In 15 states in India, there is no Muslim minister at all. In 10 of the remaining states, there is one Muslim minister, usually given a minority affairs, as has been the case in the Union Cabinet. In UP, even the minorities affairs minister holding Waqf is a Hindu. As Salil mentioned, of the current 303 Lok Sabha MPs of the Government of India, none is a Muslim. Of the 282 Lok Sabha MPs in the last Lok Sabha of 2014, none was a Muslim. So it would be fair to say that what Deen Dayal Upadhyay wanted to achieve in 1965 has been achieved conclusively under Mr. Modi. The Muslims of India are the largest unrepresented minority in any part of the democratic world. I think that the numbers would show that they have very little voice. If by democratic representation we mean voice and we mean actual power. Except for 1 or 2 states, which are the exception, the rest of India seems to be comfortable with the fact that we have realigned ourselves to this. This is new. In the previous decades, while there was discrimination in India, it wasn't actively and overtly sent down from the top. So the fact is that since 2014, this has been the case. And we should accept that there is a new sort of reality that we are living with, which we need to understand. Outside of the marginalization and the defeat of the Muslims, what else does the BJP seek? I'll just go through a few things that I have understood them as doing. I should say that the BJP doesn't require any sort of constitutional change to bring about what they see as a Hindu Rashtra, because they have themselves never defined it. But in addition to the political defeat of Muslims, there seems to be one more facet, which is active brutalization through law. And we've seen the most visible example of this in late 2019 through CAA, when religion became a factor in citizenship for the first time in our country overtly. It may not have been the case through law in the past, but now it is in the letter of the law. Those people who have understood and known what the CAA and the NRC means necessarily need to understand it through the lens of only one state, which is Assam. Both what Mr. Shah has promised will come to India in the course of time, and what has transpired in the state of Assam needs to be fully understood by all desis, I think, everywhere in the world. That the first part is that we will have a law which says that refugees coming in from 3 countries in South Asia who are non-Muslims will be absorbed without documentation as being citizens of India, those who came in before the end of 2014. The law leaves out the Muslims and Jews. The second part to it, Mr. Shah says, is that we will have the NRC coming throughout India in the same fashion that it did in Assam. What did the NRC do in Assam is what we need to ask ourselves. There was a story reported yesterday by the Center for Justice and Peace run by Teesta Setalvad, which said that a Dalit woman in her 60s had been released from jail because CJP, which is Setalvad's outfit, had fought for it in court and got her out. She didn't have the documentation to prove that she was not a foreigner. The Assamese state under the BJP is running something called foreigners tribunals, which is essentially people on 2-year contracts who are not formally part of the government, who will determine whether or not your documents satisfy the conditions that they seek. There's an affidavit that the BJP government filed in Guwahati High Court, which says that only those contractors, and these are people on 2-year contracts, only those contractors who had a minimum number of people declared foreigner would be given an extension. Those people who would not have a higher number of people declared foreigner would not get their jobs back. This is the government's own declaration. Things like this have come to the notice of the world, which is why and I'm sure that we'll discuss this later, this is the reason why the CAA is not law yet in India. It's been passed, it was passed a year and a half ago, but it's not yet law. The CAA does something unique to Muslims in India in one way, which is that it reverses burden of proof. Common law nations usually have something, there's a cliche, there's a stock phrase called innocent until proven guilty. The CAA is part of a series of laws that the BJP has brought into India where Muslims are guilty unless they prove themselves to be innocent. CAA is one of them. The state will determine on the basis of anonymous complaints who is suspect. This is in the state of Assam. And the suspects then will have to line up and show to the satisfaction of a contractor on a 2-year contract the fact that they and their ancestors have been in Assam. This reversal of burden of proof extends through a series of laws. The so-called love jihad laws, which have come through in the BJP states in the last 2.5 years. Uttarakhand was the first one, UP, MP, Haryana, my own state of Karnataka is now saying that it will legislate it. Says that if a woman should convert into a family that is Muslim, it is not the evidence of the adult woman that the state will consider. The state will consider whether or not it believes the family that she has converted into. The family needs to prove whether the woman is speaking the truth and has converted of her own volition. This is also a reversal of burden of proof. In 2015, the Prime Minister made a series of speeches against beef possession. I've been a journalist since the mid-90s. I had never come across a category of beef lynching. This is a gift to India of this government, which was introduced specifically after the Prime Minister pushed for it in 2015. And the two states, Haryana and Maharashtra, responded with laws that criminalize the possession of beef. In Gujarat, cow slaughter attracts life imprisonment. This is ostensibly a economic crime. The constitution says that we need to ensure that cows are not slaughtered for the benefit of animal husbandry. If you steal ₹1 billion from a bank in India, you do not get life imprisonment. But if you are suspected of killing a cow, not only do you get life imprisonment, you have to prove to the satisfaction of the state that the meat in your fridge is not beef. There was a man convicted in Gujarat in 2019 because he was unable to prove to the satisfaction of a court that the meat that was served in his daughter's wedding was beef. The Forensic Sciences Laboratory sent a report back to the court saying that it could not determine whether it was beef or not. The court held that given the fact that the state could not prove it, it was incumbent on the man, who was a Muslim obviously, to prove that that meat was not beef. So there's a fairly effective means of brutalization that the BJP is able to achieve through existing laws. It doesn't need to change anything in the constitution. It can use the so-called reasonable restrictions to be able to apply laws which might be seen as barbaric anywhere else in the world. Triple Talaq is the only law in India which criminalizes a civil wrong, B, segregates that wrong based on faith. Divorce is a civil wrong in India. If I were to say to my wife, talaq, talaq, talaq in one sitting, our marriage would not be dissolved and it would not be a crime. The Supreme Court said that triple talaq in one sitting is not a crime. If a Muslim man were to say talaq, talaq, talaq to his wife, it would not dissolve the marriage, but it would become a crime. The logic of this is difficult to understand, except if you see it through the lens of a party and a group of people who want to specifically go after Muslims and see what laws can be written up so that they can be brutalized. There is no other sense to the law. It is after the fact that the Supreme Court invalidated single sitting triple talaq that the criminalization came into being. Completely senseless, but that is the way that we are in India today of 2021. Kashmir is the only state in India where we use for crowd control a 12-gauge shotgun. Those of you who are in the US might be familiar with this term, using birdshot, which is fired into protesters. It has blinded over 800 people. It has killed people. It has wounded even those people who wield the guns themselves, because this is shot coming out of unrifled barrels. It has harmed and blinded infants who've been nowhere near the protests where the guns were fired. The judiciary doesn't seem to be interested in the things that we have just looked at. That if one were to go to court and say there seems to be discrimination of a sort in the laws that are being written up and applied in this country, which is constitutionally secular, constitutionally pluralist, we do not tend to get relief. The third aspect, and thankfully this doesn't involve only Muslims, it also involves some of the rest of us, is that this government has gone after those people who oppose it with the strongest laws that it has at hand. So if you look at the protesters of CAA, if you look at the protesters who were part of the Bhima Koregaon case, these are people who are in jail without trial, some of whom completed, as the lawyer Indira Jaising noted yesterday, 3 years in jail without the trial having been commenced. So the government is very comfortable using harsh law that would be at the cusp of what the Constitution actually allows. And the debate we should be having is how it is that we can pull that cusp back. The Constitution of India does two things. It allows the BJP to brutalize us. We should not be in any sort of, space that suggests that the Constitution is perfect. It's not. It is the Constitution allows the BJP to do to us what it has since 2014. On the other hand, the Constitution also allows us the space to push back and to be able to change what is going on. And I think that is the crux of what we should be discussing. How is it that in the center of this, we can push back against what has been happening to this country and to our people since 2014? And how is it that we can reverse this in time and be able to come back to what might be seen as normalcy? Thank you very much.